Dublin's post office building, headquarters of the rebels in 1916. And the veterans returned 50 years later on the anniversary of that troubled time. President de Valera, a proud figure, walked out to inspect the Guard of Honor.
In 1965, in anticipation of the 50th commemorations of the Easter Rising the following year, the well-known and respected priest, Canon Tommy Doherty, wrote a poem about the upcoming anniversary. In his poem, he stated that, "When Ireland celebrates next year her struggle to be free, I hope that Letterkenny gets its name in history. For there are still a few around who formed the first vanguard to fight the British Empire down in Willie Boyle's backyard." These words recall how, in a small building at the back of Willie Boyle's premises on the main street in September 1917, the first Sinn Féin club in the town of Letterkenny was formed to fight the British Empire. Within a few short months, its membership had grown dramatically, and several of its members became actively involved in the armed struggle for independence. What makes the establishment and rapid rise of this club all the more remarkable was that prior to the events of Easter 1916, the town of Letterkenny was seen more as a stronghold for democratic nationalism, symbolised by the influence of the ancient Order of the Hibernians and the Irish Parliamentary Party. However, a combination of various events, both local and national, ensured that a more radicalised Republican element rose to the fore in the town, culminating in the shooting dead of a young RIC constable on the main street in May of 1921. What do we mean, though, by the terms nationalism and republicanism? Essentially, they are two sides of the same coin, sharing the same ultimate goal of national independence, but achieving it by vastly different means. Rising from the personalities and events of the mid-19th century, such as Daniel O'Connell and the Repeal movement, through to Charles Stewart Parnell and the Home Rule movement, the idea of nationalism was to achieve self-governance purely through a democratic process. This resulted in the formation and gradual rise of the Irish Parliamentary Party at Westminster, with the aim of separation from the United Kingdom and the creation of an independent Ireland through peaceful and democratic means. However, a more radical element existed within this ideology, originally stemming from the writings of the so-called father of republicanism, Theobald Wolfe and United Irish Rising of 1798, and later adopted by groups such as the Fenians, the IRB, and then later the IRA. They too sought independence from United Kingdom rule, but the fundamental difference was that they believed this could only be achieved through force of arms, rebellion, and insurrection. Just as the Irish Parliamentary Party represented nationalism, the new Sinn Féin party, formed in 1905, came to symbolise the more radical Republican movement. So how did these similar yet conflicting ideologies manifest themselves in the town of Letterkenny? Owing to its Ulster plantation origins at the beginning of the 17th century and its position as a garrison town, it's no surprise to note that up until the late 19th century, Letterkenny was largely seen as a town loyal to the Crown, dominated particularly by the Protestant ascendancy merchants and landowners. Support for continued rule by Britain over Ireland was not so simply delineated by religion, however. Following the failure of the 1798 rebellion, on behalf of the Roman Catholic clergy of the Diocese of Raphoe, on the 3rd of December 1799, Bishop Anthony Coyle wrote a letter to King George III from Letterkenny in which he professed loyalty to the King and even supported the idea of a union between both countries, a union that would occur 3 years later. Further evidence of a town loyal to the Crown comes from the Londonderry Guardian newspaper on the 17th of March 1863, which gives a report of celebrations in Letterkenny on the marriage of the Prince of Wales. Tuesday last was celebrated in a becoming manner by the inhabitants of this prosperous town, who had made every preparation to testify loyalty to their sovereign and her illustrious family. The streets and principal buildings were illuminated, and every demonstration of joy was manifested by people of all ranks and creeds. Later that same year, the chairman of the town commissioners, John Robert Boyd, addressed the Lord Lieutenant General on his visit to the town, and he stated, "We, the town commissioners of the town of Letterkenny, would appear to be deficient in the loyalty and attachment we feel for our beloved Queen, if we did not avail ourselves of the present opportunity of welcoming your Excellency to the county of Donegal, and to this its chief town. We assure your Excellency that the county of Donegal, and this town especially, have always shown their loyalty to their sovereign, not only in words, but whenever opportunity has offered, by substantial deeds. Today, evidence of the former British rule in the town can still be seen in the post office box opposite Ardune Parochial House. Like many post boxes across the country, after independence was gained, to save money in replacing the old red post boxes, most of them were simply painted green, with the old British insignia still emblazoned on them. By the dawn of the 20th century, however, the rise in nationalism in the town was clearly evident. In 1891, the number of parliamentary voters for Letterkenny was reported as 792 nationalists and 467 unionists. As part of the late 19th century Gaelic revival, branches of the Gaelic League and United Irish League appeared in the town, alongside a new GAA club, the Lab Jarrigs, the first in the town, formed in 1905. Cultural nationalism was very much on the rise. At this time, the Ancient Order of Hibernians, or the AOH, had become popular throughout the country in raising nationalist support, and a branch soon appeared in the town. Joseph Devlin, MP from Belfast, had reorganised the AOH from 1905, and its members largely came from supporters of the Irish Parliamentary Party, with their shared goal of Home Rule. Key to the success of the AOH in the town was the influence of the Bishop of Raphoe, the Most Reverend Dr. Patrick O'Donnell, and his administrator in the cathedral, Father John McCafferty, who later became national president of the AOH. In August 1907, Devlin appeared in the town for the first time on the invitation of Bishop O'Donnell and addressed a large nationalist crowd in the Bishop's Field, today the site of a primary school. The paper stated, "The occasion was one of remarkable and exceptional interest, remarkable because in number it far and away transcended nearly every previous assemblage, and exceptional because the remarkable demonstration of the unity and determination of the Ancient Order of the Hibernians in support of the Irish party gave it a special significance." 3 years later, in August 1910, another large nationalist demonstration was held in the town. The paper stated, "Special trains were run from all the chief centres of the county, and the railway resources were most severely taxed in order to afford accommodation for the thousands who flocked to the cathedral city." While nationalism was clearly on the rise in Letterkenny, an element of unionism was still evident in the town. In response to the introduction of the Third Home Rule Bill at Westminster in 1912, Unionists had signed the Ulster Covenant and formed the Ulster Volunteer Force to resist any implementation of what they saw as Rome Rule. September 28, 1912 was celebrated as Ulster Day, when special gatherings for signing the Covenant took place. Meetings at Letterkenny took place in both Presbyterian churches, where 671 signatures were collected. 1 year later, 82 men from Letterkenny were listed as members of the UVF, using a drill hall locally for a number of years on the Boyd estate at Ballymacool. To counter this unionist force, nationalists formed the Irish Volunteers, and a corps was formed in Letterkenny in April 1914, following a meeting held in the Literary Institute, the site of the county library today. The first drill of the newly formed regiment was held in the ball court of the Institute, and in celebration of the second reading of the Home Rule Bill, a parade was held, headed by the Hibernians Band, with 400 volunteers and 25 sectional commanders making a circuit of the town. At Century Hill, the regiment formed up, and in the light of a huge bonfire, Father McCafferty delivered an address, complimenting the volunteers on the fine turnout and the order and decorum displayed. In addition to the volunteers, upwards of 600 people took part. Support for nationalism and the Irish party in Letterkenny was also made apparent by the Urban Council. Following the successful passing of the Home Rule Bill through the House of Commons, Town Clerk John G. Larkin stated that, "To Mr. Redmond and the Irish party, we pledge our ungrudging support throughout the remaining stages of the Home Rule struggle, and we trust that the time is not too distant when Mr. Redmond will preside as first Prime Minister over an Irish legislature fully representative of every creed and class in Ireland, north and south, east and west." By September 1914, with Home Rule receiving its royal assent, the nationalists of Letterkenny took to the streets to celebrate. Every nationalist house in the town was decorated with flags and bunting, while at Century Hill, the market square, and at various street junctures large bonfires blazed, and all around the town the hilltops and hillsides were lit up. The Hibernian Band headed a procession of 60 torchlight bearers, followed by 200 volunteers under Commander Carrigan, with at least 2,000 nationalists taken to the streets. At the Bishop's Palace grounds, loud cheers were given for Bishop O'Donnell, who delivered an address, and returning to the market square, Father McCafferty congratulated all on the achievement. Loud cheers were given for the Bishop, John Redmond, John Dillon, Joseph Devlin, and the Irish party. It was quite clear then, by all of this, that the town of Letterkenny was very much now a nationalist town, committed to the idea of home rule and achieving independence through peaceful democratic means. However, this dream of home rule, one that began with Isaac Butt, Charles Stewart Parnell and now John Redmond, was never to be realised. When the General Post Office was seized on Easter Monday 1916, our national history was, in the words of W. B. Yeats, changed utterly. Initially, both the Irish Party and the media condemned the actions of the insurgents. In a meeting of the Letterkenny Guardians of the 6th of May 1916, Chairman Mr. Philip Carroll commented on the revolt that had taken place in Dublin the week before. He said, "I think it would be a proper thing to condemn the actions of these soreheads." By and large, just like the rest of the country, the majority of the nationalist population of the town shared this animosity towards the insurgents. However, with the execution of the signatories of the Proclamation of the Republic in Kilmainham jail, sympathy began to gradually grow for the rebels. But it wasn't until the following year that events predicated the significant rise in republicanism in this once nationalist-dominated town. In August 1917, the RIC broke into the Literary Institute, a building owned by the Catholic Church, in search of arms belonging to the volunteers. No arms were found on this occasion, but this destruction of church property greatly angered the people of the town. Father McCafferty made the sombre prediction that this wanton destruction would have the effect of turning the people away from constitutional guidance to meet force by force. The following month, the first Sinn Féin club was formed in Letterkenny, with several hundred attending the meeting in a hall in Willie Boyle's backyard, the site of the Voodoo Bar today. Prior to and after the meeting, the Derry Pipers Band marched through the town playing national songs. 130 members were enrolled that night, with a branch named the James Connolly Come On, with Dr. J. P. McGinley as president. A few days after their first meeting, the death of Thomas Ashe after being force-fed while on hunger strike ensured the fledgling club received even more members. On St. Stephen's Night 1917, the club received a great boost with the arrival of the mother, niece and sister of Patrick and Willie Pearce at a ceilidh held in the club hall. Gradually, over the subsequent weeks and months, membership of the Sinn Féin club grew as more and more people moved away from the United Irish League and the AOH. This growth of Sinn Féin locally had been caused by the dry rot of UILism and the rapid decline of Hibernianism. The young men of the UIL of 2 years ago are now to be found in the Sinn Féin rooms, where also foregather many past-time staunch Hibs. Among the older members of the UIL and AOH, there is apathy at least. They may not be Sinn Féiners, but they certainly are not all enthusiastic adherents of the organisation of Mr. Redmond and Mr. Devlin. By February 1918, the club had a membership of almost 400 people, holding Gaelic classes 2 nights each week and a ceilidh each Sunday evening. In the same month, Eamon de Valera, accompanied by Sean McEntee and Sam O'Flaherty, arrived in the town on their tour of the Northwest. On their arrival, the leaders were met by 400 supporters at the Port Bridge and escorted to Macquarie's Hotel by torchlit procession. The following day, a public meeting was held in the market square, and prior to its commencement, several hundred people marched through the town to the hotel and escorted the leaders to the meeting place. In contrast to the welcome afforded Joseph Devlin a decade earlier, the political shift in the minds of the people was evident when Dr. McGinley stated that De Valera did not want to have anything to do with men of the type of Joseph Devlin, who stood for the union of Ireland with England. A voice from the crowd responded, "Away with him." James McMonigal recalled years later that in 1913 the Ancient Order of Hibernians, which was benevolent and pacifist, was the only nationalist organisation in the county. About this time, units of the National Volunteers under the leadership of John Redmond were organised in Letterkenny under the auspices of the AOH. Subsequent to the rebellion of 1916, I realised that the National Volunteers did not intend to take any active part in nationalist affairs. So early in 1917, a number of us left and organised the first local Sinn Féin club and volunteer company in the district. Young men were slow in joining with us, but in 1918, due to the scare of conscription, large numbers flocked to the ranks. This threat of conscription into the British Army to fight in the war in Europe was one of the key moments in drawing new members to this new Sinn Féin club. In response to this attempt, a large demonstration took place in April 1918 on Sentry Hill. Over 500 members of Sinn Féin and 80 students of St Eunan's College marched in military formation, with the procession headed by a joint Hibernian and Sinn Féin band. When an anti-conscription committee was formed comprising of members of the United Irish League, the Ancient Order of Hibernians and the Labour Association, it was the speech of Dr McGinley of Sinn Féin that received the most cheers from the 2,500 people present. When the 1918 elections took place, the records will show that despite this rise in Republicanism, East Donegal was one of only 4 constituencies that still voted for the Irish Party. However, this was the result of a friendly understanding between the rival nationalist parties, at the behest of Cardinal Logue, to unite in 8 key constituencies to ensure that their votes were not split to the benefit of the Unionist Party that would enhance their claims for partition. The overwhelming electoral success of Sinn Féin in the 1918 elections gave Republicans a popular mandate in which to engage in a bloody and brutal War of Independence, with the first shots being fired in January 1919 at Solohead Beg in County Tipperary. The Irish Volunteers, renamed the Irish Republican Army, or IRA, targeted Royal Irish Constabulary and British Army barracks and ambushed the patrols, capturing arms and forcing the closure of barracks in isolated areas. The British government responded by importing recruits from Britain, the Black and Tans and auxiliaries, who became notorious for their ill discipline and reprisal attacks on civilians in Ireland. Ernie O'Malley, training officer to the IRA rural units, visited the Letterkenny area in early 1919 to organise the local volunteers. Up until now, the Irish volunteers had been generally employed at drill parades, route marches and occasional raids for arms in the homes of Ulster volunteers, mostly in the predominantly Unionist Lagan area to the east of the town. But from 1919, the organisation had a military structure, divided into divisions, brigades, battalions and companies. Donegal was now the 1st Northern Division, within which there were 4 brigades. East Brigade was under the command of Sam Flaherty from Castlefin, with James Dawson of Castle Street, Letterkenny, Vice OC. Within this brigade was Letterkenny Battalion, known as 4th Battalion, under the command of Dawson, with 4 companies: Letterkenny Company, Mattercunningham Company, Churchill Company and Fanet Company. Owing to the fact that Letterkenny was the location of a garrison barracks at Sprackburn, as well as having 2 RIC barracks at either end of the main street, it is no surprise that very little engagements took place in the War of Independence in Letterkenny. However, the move from peaceful democratic nationalism to a more violent mindset in the town was made evident on Wednesday the 18th of May 1921, when, in a night of carefully orchestrated violence, one young police constable from County Kildare lost his life on the main street, while others were badly injured, then and later on in the reprisals by the Black and Tans. Constable Albert Carter was aged just 20 years old when he was killed on that fateful night. He was the son of William and Hannah Maria Carter and one of 11 children from Kilmeague near Newbridge in County Kildare. He joined the RIC in January of 1921, just like his brothers Alfred and William, who had both enlisted 1 year previously, and he was stationed in the town of Letterkenny from March of 1921. At this time, Pater O'Donnell was commanding an IRA flying column in West Donegal, and large detachments of British forces from Derry were sent to that area in May to capture them. O'Donnell issued an order to Anthony Dawson, acting OC of Letterkenny Company in the absence of his brother James, to carry out an attack on the British forces in Letterkenny in an effort to relieve the pressure on his men. Following these orders, Dawson organised an attack on the main street on Wednesday the 18th of May. The place they chose as their ambush site was an area known as the Wallsteads, near the Literary Institute. This was a small clearing area with ruined walls of an old building that were overgrown with grass and hedges. Shortly after 11 p.m, Constable Carter set off from No. 2 Police Barracks at the bottom of the town, the site of the Wolf Tone Bar today, along with Sergeant Charles Maguire and 2 other constables. As they approached the ambush site, shots rang out, and Carter was shot dead by a revolver bullet to the throat, while Sergeant Maguire received 2 wounds in the hip and the calf. Looking at the map, we can see that he was shot approximately outside the Voodoo nightclub today. At the same time, a second group of ambushers opened fire at the No. 2 barracks. Hearing the commotion from the top of the main street in No. 1 barracks beside the courthouse, VP McMullen solicitors today, all the available police, reinforced by the military located at Sprackburn, paraded the streets, which were by now practically deserted by civilians. However, the Black and Tans located in No. 1 barracks were quick to retaliate. 2 local civilians, Anthony Coyle and Simon Doherty, were injured in the indiscriminate reprisals, while Macquarie's Hotel, a known centre for Republicanism in the town, was shot up and a grenade thrown through the window. Tensions were calmed by the actions of D.I. Patrick Walsh, a Republican spy in the RAC and ally of the Volunteers, who took command of the situation and prevented the burning of homes of citizens in the town with nationalist sympathies. At Mass in the cathedral the next morning, the Bishop of Raphoe, Dr. Patrick O'Donnell, spoke to the congregation from the pulpit about the attack the night before. He stated, "An evil deed has been perpetrated in our midst that brings sorrow to us all. Until yesterday, this district was free from bloodshed. Last night, however, as the inhabitants of the town were retiring to rest, a young man was shot dead, without warning or mercy, and others were wounded then or later on. From what I know of the people, I do not believe there is anyone around here of murderous intent, anyone who would deliberately imbrue his hands in the blood of his fellow man. While the military inquiry delivered a verdict of murder by a person or persons unknown, from the point of view of the local IRA volunteers, the attack had the desired effect, as it drew off the forces from West Donegal, who then concentrated on the Letterkenny district in the belief that the column had moved in that direction. Padre O'Donnell was then able to make his escape. The remains of Constable Albert Carter were held in the barracks until his funeral the following Saturday in Conwall Parish Church. His remains were carried from the barracks to the church by fellow RAC constables, while all businesses were ordered to close in the town. His older brother James travelled up from Kildare to take the body home by motorcar, where he was buried in the family plot. 2 months after the shooting of Constable Albert Carter in Letterkenny, a truce was called that brought an end to the War of Independence and resulted in the signing of the Anglo-Irish Treaty at the end of the year. On Tuesday the 20th of March 1922, both Letterkenny barracks were vacated by the RAC and handed over to Colonel Commandant Glennon, 1st Northern Division IRA, at 7 a.m. The old coat of arms was taken down from over the main entrance and a large tricolour flag was hoisted through the window. About 80 RAC then left for the railway, and members of the IRA supplied by Letterkenny Company occupied the barracks. The years 1912 to 1922 are commonly referred to as the decade of change for Ireland. Seismic events took place that forever changed the political landscape of the country, that eventually led to the creation of a 26-county Republic of Ireland. And yet, the decade of change can also refer to the shift in attitudes in the once nationalist-dominated town of Letterkenny, as it embraced the more radical and violent elements of republicanism that culminated in the shooting of a young constable from Kildare on the main street 100 years ago this year. It was a night of violence that would not have been predicted at any time in the decade before, as the inhabitants in the town embraced the prospect of home rule. However, events, both national and local, conspired to bring about a change in attitudes amongst many local people as they moved away from peaceful and democratic nationalism towards a more radical extreme of achieving independence through force of arms. This political change in the outlook of the people of the town was perhaps best expressed by Sean McMenamin, president of the West Donegal Executive of Sinn Féin, when he addressed a meeting in the Club Hall in 1917, stating that he never imagined that the day should come when there would be a Sinn Féin club in the town. He stated, "Whenever, during the past 7 or 8 years, the men who called themselves the representatives of Ireland met with opposition or criticism elsewhere, they invariably referred to Donegal as their great stronghold, and to Letterkenny as the capital of that stronghold. What could these men say now, when their northern stronghold was studded all over with Sinn Féin clubs, and when the capital of that stronghold contained one of the largest and most promising clubs in the whole county? The people of Donegal, and the people of Letterkenny in particular, had been deeply sunk in the idolatry of Redmondism and parliamentarianism in the past, but that state of things existed no longer."